You're listening to Blue Jays Nation Radio with Cam Lewis and Tyler Yaremchuk, a member of the Nation network of podcasts and delivered by DoorDash.
It is episode 100 of Blue Jays Nation Radio. I think this is the first time in the history of the podcast that we've dropped episodes on back-to-back days as well, but it's a big episode 100 because it was trade deadline day. Obviously, if you're listening to this, you know that. Our podcast is brought to you by Montana's. Their all-you-can-eat rib fest is going on right now. And if you're in Western Canada, like me, then you can check out one of their events. We'll have the list in the article for this podcast if you want to check out one of those as well. It was like a buffet of trades, I suppose you could call it today, BK. No Coombsy today. Usually when I'm not on a podcast, he has some weird way of like taking shots at me for the first 3 minutes, but he bailed last minute, so he didn't really give me the opportunity to do that. But I'm excited to be joined by BK. How's it going, man?
Yeah, happy to do this with you. Also wasn't aware Coombsy wasn't going to be here until very late. So yeah, we'll get our shots in and it's going to be a great pod. Great pod without that man.
Yeah, we don't need Coombsy in here fumbling around. Anyways, let's dig into what happened on deadline day. 3 moves by the Toronto Blue Jays, and they started the day. Well, actually, maybe we could go back to last night first and talk about a move that didn't happen. You tweeted out that the Jays were in talks for Noah Syndergaard. A couple other insiders piled on top of that, and it didn't end up happening. What did you make of the Jays' interest in Noah Syndergaard, and maybe why they went as far into those talks as they did?
Yeah, I don't necessarily know the full rotation outlook, whether it was going to be like acquire Syndergaard and go with a 6-man rotation or bump Stripling from the rotation, or I don't think they would have bumped Kikuchi until he had another stretch of struggling. But yeah, I mean, to me, the ideal scenario was you add a solid, not great, like Syndergaard isn't what he used to be, but like another number 4, number 5 starter. It lets you space out Manoah's outings if you go like a month with a 6-man rotation. Because as much as he seems like a workhorse, his stuff has actually declined a little bit the last little while, and he's just now reaching his career high in innings. So it kind of felt like both a Manoah hedge, a Kikuchi hedge, and an overall rotation health hedge. So it made a lot of sense. And yeah, I tweeted out that the Jays and the Angels were in talks, and they were pretty far down the line in discussions on Monday night. That obviously didn't close Monday night, and it advanced into Tuesday. And there was, insiders reporting that basically it came down to the Phillies and Blue Jays. So clearly they ended up liking the Phillies offer. And at that point, obviously the Blue Jays pivoted elsewhere for starting or at least swingman style pitching. But yeah, it would have been fun to see Syndergaard come back just because of his history with the Jays being drafted by them. At the same time, yeah, I mean, he's not the same guy that he once was, and he would have been like a number 4, number 5 for this team.
And it's interesting because if Syndergaard would have came over, it would have been like a headline kind of banner move. Instead, you mentioned they pivot. They go get Mitch White from the LA Dodgers, a team that they've traded with in the past, bringing over Ross Stripling. But Mitch White is not going to get any sort of headlines from the national media or anything like that. They're not leading SportsCenter with Jays get Mitch White, whereas they may have led SportsCenter with Jays get Noah Syndergaard. But Mitch White is nothing to really scoff at, even if he's not a household name, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say this just because of the Dodger comp, but like he kind of is Ross Stripling, right? He's got that throws a little harder than Stripling, but he pretty seamlessly has fulfilled a swingman role while in the majors with the Dodgers. He's put up some starts and been able to have some length into games that way, and also he's pitched out of the bullpen in a long man relief and occasionally higher leverage appearance here and there, but. Yeah, there aren't very many players who can bounce back and forth between the rotation and bullpen like there used to be in baseball. It is tricky, when it comes to like the build up and of a rotation and the repertoire needed to be in a rotation, all that stuff. But yeah, he just kind of feels like the Blue Jays just acquired a long-term Ross Stripling. I believe Mitch White has like another 4 years of control after this year. So it is a long-term move, not a high salary move. At the same time, I mean, results wise this year, he's comparable to Syndergaard, and stuff wise, like the way those metrics would play out, he's, somewhat comparable to Syndergaard. I think the fastball difference between the two of them is like 0.2 miles per hour. So again, much less fanfare, and understandably so. I totally get that, but still a valuable role for this team this year. Again, if they want to just have some 6-man rotation weeks, or if somebody gets hurt and somebody needs to step in the rotation, you now have a Mitch White to cover that role. And he's got a prominent place with this team moving forward. The Blue Jays gave up Nick Frasso for Mitch White, and Frasso might not be a name that's up there for a lot of fans. But in the 2020 pandemic draft, the Jays took him in the 4th round. He pretty quickly had Tommy John surgery. He came back this year and was throwing like 100 miles an hour as a starter. And in Vancouver, he just got promoted there recently. But between Dunedin and Vancouver, he was basically pitching to a sub-1 ERA with a K rate over 13. So he looked very good. Obviously, again, a banged up arm and all that stuff. Just coming back, and small sample size, like 35 innings this year, but he was dominant and clearly a guy that was asked about a lot by teams at the deadline. So again, it speaks, while Mitch White wasn't, a dumpster diving move, they gave up something they really liked to get Mitch White, and it'll be interesting to see, how well he fulfills that role they need him this year and next.
Yeah, between single A and high A, he's racked up 57 strikeouts through 36 2/3 innings. His ERA, like you said, it's not just like barely under 1, it's 0.74. So he's got some really good numbers, but you got to give up to get, right? And you look at the numbers Mitch White, like you said, has posted this year. It's Noah Syndergaard-esque without maybe the fanfare and the high salary of that kind of move. So it's one of those things where I think today it leaves a lot of casual fans kind of throwing their arms up being like, what the hell? But I wonder if 12 months from now, we're maybe not looking back on this and being like, damn, that was like a really smart move, similar to the Ross Stripling acquisition, right? I know you kind of joked about it, right? Like a lazy comparison to be like, oh, Mitch White to Stripling just because they're both Dodgers. But I think it's one of those things that as time goes on, we'll look back on this and be like, you know what? That was another astute move by Atkins and company.
Yeah, I think just because of the special arm they traded away, this is one of those highly volatile trades, right? Like it could work out phenomenally well in the short term and be a very clear win long term.
Yeah.
Frasso could be healthy and be this like high 90s starting pitcher, and that could really come back to hurt in a couple of years. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, this was future value realized, traded away for present value. And, we haven't touched on this, but an overall a somewhat underwhelming deadline. So some of these names that aren't necessarily big names, clearly the Jays are banking on performance from them. And yeah, I mean, they're going to have to prove it through actual performance, because the overall shock value of the deadline kind of comes across as, well, this is underwhelming.
Atkins, in speaking to the media today, said, quote, "We're exceptionally excited about the group that we've added to this exciting young core that we have so much confidence in, and to add a group to that team that can be a part of this for some time." So obviously speaking to the fact that a lot of these guys under team control. Mitch White was one of the final moves of the deadline. We'll get to Whit Merrifield in a second. Jays also earlier in the day, though, doing the one thing we really expected them to, and that's go out and get some relievers, and Anthony Bass and a local product, Zach Papa, good Canadian boy. But what do you make of going to get Anthony Bass? Like I get a lot of really mixed reviews based on where you read and what you look into with Anthony Bass. A lot of, he's obviously having a tremendous season. Good chunk of people say that's not sustainable. Another chunk of people say, yeah, it's probably sustainable for the rest of this season, but relievers are volatile. So there's always risk when you go out and do something like this, going to get relievers at the deadline. What do you make of Bass first before we get to Pop?
Yeah, Bass is not the same pitcher he was as a Blue Jay a couple years ago, right? So he was a journeyman, bounced around the minors and majors for a handful of years. I believe he went overseas for 1 or 2 years. He's not the typical path to just being a performing major league pitcher. He's 34 years old right now. That being said, yes, he's better than he was as a Blue Jay. There's a reason he was desirable. For those who like a baseball savant page and those 0 to 100 bars, he has nothing but red. The only thing that he has a poor pitch metric in is his fastball spin rate. He doesn't have a high spin rate at all with his fastball. Beyond that, absolutely everything is like 75th to 90th percentile. So a truly good reliever with a chase rate of 86 percentile in baseball. So he gets some swing and miss, a whiff rate of 78th percentile. So he gets some of those that swing and miss the Jays are looking for. He's not a premium swing and miss guy, which again we'll kind of address when we overall talk about the trade deadline here. But Anthony Bass is a legitimate reliever. And with a $3 million option next year too, right? So you get him for a year and a half. I mean, he's quite different than the guy he was a couple of years ago. And his pitch usage has changed. He throws way more of his off speed stuff now, and that's been a winning formula for him. But again, you want to check out Baseball Savant and look at 2020 when he was a Blue Jay versus 2022. Very different metrics that you see there. So
one of the concerns I saw with him is just that he's been suppressing home runs at maybe an unsustainable level this year. And if that's going to, eventually rise back up to the average a little, it could very well happen in a ballpark like the Rogers Center. But again, like they were joking on, I think I was watching Baseball Central or something, or Bark or whatever, about how Joe Jimenez, right? That's a guy who a lot of people talked about. It's like, oh, that's a name you go get. And it's like, well, 12 months ago, he was like a DFA candidate. And now all of a sudden people were believing him to be some sort of elite reliever that can be the guy for you to get three big outs in a postseason game. Like, I don't know. I think to some extent, you're always just rolling the dice when you go get these guys. And like the other thing we know about deadline acquisitions, and again, relievers specifically, maybe Zach Pop ends up being impactful and Bass gets lit up in 3 starts and he's like fucking Brad Hand 2.0. I know I probably shouldn't put that out into the universe, but the point is you just never know with relievers, right?
Yeah. And your point about the home run rate is valid. He has a way below league average home run rate, and those things tend to regress to the mean. I will say that his low home run rate is probably why his ERA is 1.4. Clearly, he's not a 1.4 ERA guy, but that home run rate can climb. And again, it's all the other metrics that look really good, right? So yes, you're probably going to see some regression there. His fastball's 95. He's not some high 90s guy. But yeah, there's a lot to like. Zach Pop, super intriguing. And the way this trade played out here on Tuesday was fascinating to me. Kashai Davidi broke the early parts of the trade saying the Blue Jays either got or were close to getting Zach Pop, and Groshans was part of the deal. And everyone's first inclination there is to go look at stats, right? Because Zach Pop, I mean, what do we know about Zach Pop? So we go look, he's got like a 6K rate per 9, right? Like a totally underwhelming strikeout rate. And you're like, all right, like how is Groshans involved in a Zach Pop trade? This feels like a minor league, minor level deal. And then you get the Anthony Bass name, and okay, like this trade makes more sense. But then you get to looking into Zach Pop. And the guy can throw like 97, 98, 99 with like a power sinker. And Eno Saris, who writes for The Athletic, he has a pitching metric that he's built over years. He's a big pitching data guy. And he's got stuff plus and control plus or location plus. And basically he'll evaluate pitchers on their stuff. He's got metrics that go into that. And then how well they control it. And he said Zach Pop has like a top 30 slider in all of baseball this year. So he's just not throwing it enough. So if you take his power sinker with an elite ground ball rate and pair it with an elevated use of the slider, which is clearly an elite pitch that he doesn't throw enough. Again, the Marlins aren't probably the most data-friendly team out there, and maybe they were falling short on this side of things. But I'm super intrigued by Zach Pop. Again, you don't hang your deadline on the acquisition of guys that you can dream on. But again, the high velocity that the Jays want is there. He's got a good ground ball rate, which is nice, but it's not the swing and miss. His performance to date hasn't had the high K rate, but there is legitimate stuff to dream on. And he's a guy you have for like 5-6 years, right? So very intriguing trade. It was a great trade by the Jays, in my opinion. Jordan Groshans has not developed to be anywhere near the prospect type he has. When you see that the Jays gave up their 4th prospect for these guys, don't believe that. Internally, I doubt the Jays had him as a top 10 guy at this point. Wow. But yeah, so there's a lot to dream on with Pop, and some immediate returns you would expect from Anthony Bass. It was a really good trade. Just in isolation, it was a really good trade, even though it felt underwhelming even at the time.
Yeah, and again, I think not to do this, but like some people who are maybe just casually observing the team might sit there and be like, "Oh, you gave up Jordan Groshans? Like he was our first round pick a few years ago, or it seems like he was a first round pick a few years ago." But this is maybe one of those instances where the team held on to a prospect too long, right? Where the shine and glamour of him being a first round pick is that continues to just wear less and less. And it's like, oh, the flaws of his game are getting exposed in professional baseball. His value seemed to really start to plummet as he started to plummet down these prospect lists as well. Like they probably get more if they deal Groshans at the deadline last season.
Oh, definitely. And Groshans has had one of the weirder like roller coaster, from draft to, progression to high A that I can remember, because the Jays picked him 12th overall. And he was more like, again, just industry prospect rankings had him more like 30th. He also signed for under slot, which was kind of an indication on, the Jays really like them, but it's not like anybody else was going to pick him that high necessarily. So first of all, he was kind of overdrafted. And then he burst onto the scene with a monster rookie minor league season where he went from overdrafted to like underdrafted. Like, oh, did the Jays get like a top 5 caliber guy from that draft class at 12? Like, what a deal. And then he got hurt and he just dealt with all these injuries nonstop from like 2019 through, 2021. And then obviously the pandemic year was lost. And he actually performed in 2019 and 2021 when healthy. And he never showed the home run pop you expected, but he hit 7 bombs in 75 games in 2021, like more than this year. And then, coming into this season, just a weird minor league season. Very weird. He's walking a decent amount. He's not striking out a ton, but like all he does is hit singles and like slap the ball opposite field. And when you're a guy who probably profiles as a third baseman and not a fast one, if you're just hitting singles, you're not all that valuable as a prospect. So I wish him all the best. I hope maybe some swing tune-up can maybe bring some power back that he has as a prospect, because he was seen as a power guy at a high school. But he was doing nothing for the Jays at this time. He had no immediate future with the team anyways, and just an underwhelming prospect. So they got 2 interesting guys for him. Like I said, it was a great trade in isolation.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. I can't imagine there's a lot of fans out there complaining about this one. Again, if Bass comes up and isn't good, like that's the risk you take acquiring a veteran reliever at the deadline. At least, even if that happens, you have, an intriguing arm to kind of track for the next little bit in Zach Pop. And maybe that pays out for you. Maybe he becomes an impact piece of the bullpen. And, Bass aside, this could maybe still end up being a decent trade. Right? Like, I think they're just covered a little bit in the sense that they get something to help now, something to kind of keep an eye on down the road as well. The final move of the deadline for the Jays came right at the end, and I really got a chuckle. And I thought the same thing when it kind of popped up. Is like, oh, Whit Merrifield's been traded. I forget who the insider was who broke it first. And I was like, oh, fuck. Wait, no, he's unvaccinated. He's not coming to the Jays. And I saw Stoughton even tweeted like, yeah, like it's definitely not to the Jays. And I was like, yeah, no, it's not. And then Passan hits us with the, oh no, it is the Jays. Like it's a done deal. And I really surprised. I get a chuckle out of reading those quotes too. That were, and I don't have the exact one in front of me, but it was him being like, yeah, I'm not vaccinated, but if I was on a better team, I might be vaccinated. And it's like, yeah, that's just a generally weird thing to do. But he seemingly will get vaccinated at some point here. I think we're assuming there's no way the Jays pull this trigger.
You have to imagine.
There's no way they pull the trigger, even though it was a minute before the deadline. You would imagine they had him on the line and were like, are you going to get the shot? Because you don't trade anything for Whit Merrifield if he's only going to play like half your games down the stretch.
Yeah, I don't have any knowledge of his vaccination status or any conversations that happened, but like just common sense would indicate it's either coming immediately. And remember, I mean, in the States, he can get a Johnson & Johnson vaccine, single shot, and 14 days is the wait, right? So it's not like he's got to go double dose of Pfizer and then, not be able to play in Canada for like 5 weeks, right? It's not like that. So it's a fair assumption to make, but that's all we can do at this point. Assume it. But really interesting deal. I'm going to have to take a little shot at you, Tyler, because I'm pretty sure I broke this trade slightly in front of Passan. I'd have to go back and check.
No.
So Mark Feinsman was the first report Merrifield was traded. I quote tweeted his and said, Merrifield is going to the Blue Jays. I'm almost positive I beat Passan by like 5 seconds because I got the notification from Passan, which I had on lockdown after I had sent it. Like I hit sent and then his came up and then I think Heyman's came up. So I know we both did it at like 3:02. We're at like 3 insiders and myself. We're at 3:02. I'm almost positive I was the first one of that group. So I snuck it in there. So Merrifield's an interesting fit for this team. He's not as good as he once was. But where I find it interesting is I feel like he's a center field hedge for George Springer's injury status because he grades out well in center field and, not the largest sample, but he's fast, right? He's older, but he's retained his speed. He's still a base stealer. He's not a left-handed bat, obviously, but the Jays, if they needed a hedge for center field, they needed to be somebody who could at least adequately play the position. And there wasn't too many combinations of left-handed bats who can also play a good center field available, right? So I'm going to guess that he takes Zach Collins' roster spot. He's going to see time in center field. And he just feels like an overall health hedge during the season. and then a speed, versatile guy in the playoffs, right? So a guy who can get you stolen base, a guy who can pinch run, a guy who can play second base and center field as needed. Espinal and Biggio both hit terribly in July, so he could get some reps at second base for those guys who have struggled offensively lately. It makes more sense than it felt on the surface. Again, relatively underwhelming. He's around next year for, I believe, like $6.5 million.
Yeah.
He's got a bonus based on playing time this year, and he's going to hit that threshold. So, Merrifield is around next year. And, he just kind of works as like, a cover for Springer. I think that's the plan. That's my expectation is he just is used to play center field when Springer doesn't. But we'll have to see, because it'll be interesting to see what kind of role the Jays envision for him.
Interesting to see. I was just looking at his splits between lefties and righties, and like he gets way more ABs against, or so far this season, I guess I should say, he's had way more ABs against righties, like over double. And his numbers are like fairly similar. Just looking at like his baseline here, like, I don't know, he's batting 241 against righties, 239 against lefties. His slugging percentage goes up a little bit against righties, but I think you're bang on with that. He's the George Springer hedge, right? Like if this lineup is fully healthy, Whit Merrifield's probably not playing every day, unless they're just shifting pieces around to get him more playing time. But I have no problem with this move. What did they end up giving up for him? Actually, I totally missed on that.
So Maxwell Castillo, who we kind of saw as
I did see
for the
that,
Jays,
yeah.
Castillo, and then Samad Taylor, who was a pretty loud stats guy in AA last year, who the Jays didn't protect from the Rule 5 draft, which kind of told you how they felt about him. And he's underwhelmed this year. I don't see that as much of a loss. I think they'd rather just let him go now, opposed to feel they need to add him to the 40-man after the year. But yeah, Castillo obviously was solid in the role he filled with the Jays. He wasn't as good as as the ERA indicated. But yeah, I mean, he showed you a little something there that was interesting. Merrifield's season is noteworthy in that his overall numbers, they're not good, right? Like they're just not great. But he had like a Tapia-esque, maybe worse, first month of the season. As March and April, his weighted runs created plus was 1. He was basically like the worst hitter in baseball the first month of the season. Since then, he's been slightly above average. So he's kind of got this trajectory where he was getting better as the season went. And in July, he had 132 weighted runs created plus. So he's quite hot this last month. Again, he just kind of fits as like an 10th or 11th roster piece. And there's a few different areas he can cover. And again, like a fine add in isolation. We'll see how it plays out with his role. But yeah, part of what is overall underwhelming, but you can make sense of a particular deal.
Max Castillo going out, like Mitch White basically takes his spot, right? As sort of that your sixth starter kind of position or whatever. So that makes sense as well. So that's it for the Jays. So let's do the old cliche game of giving Ross Atkins a letter grade for his performance here on deadline day. Bass, Pop, Merrifield, and White come in. No one, I mean, Groshans is a popular name. Obviously, Castillo spent some time with the big club, but it's not like, they did something crazy and gave up Gabe Moreno or whatever. So they got a few pieces. They didn't give up a ton. What grade would you slap on this?
I'm going to say like a C plus, or like, call it like below average. It's hard to grade just the Blue Jays when you're looking at what other teams are doing and being like, that's better. Right. Because then it's like, well, okay, this doesn't feel good. But the Blue Jays did get better today. They have a better roster than they had yesterday, which counts for something. But yeah, I mean, you just kind of look at it and you're like meh. I think the big change to how we all would have perceived this is if they added that big swing and miss guy, whether it was a Jimenez from Detroit, like you mentioned, or Soto from Detroit, or if they had pulled off Iglesias from the Angels, which certainly the Jays were talking about. He was a weird case because he's a monster contract. He's still $48 million owed to Iglesias over the next 3 years. And his velo's down a little bit this year, but he still gets swing and miss. And, Anthony Bass is slightly above average in reliever swing and miss. And again, his, chase rate's good and all that stuff. But he just didn't feel like you got that premium pen piece, whether it was controllable or not, that you'd want to have. So I think that's what contributes to it feeling very underwhelming. At the same time, again, we covered the trades. Just if you look at the trade with the Marlins, that feels like a big win with some untapped potential with Zach Pop. The Royals trade, again, is fine. You don't feel like you gave up a ton. Mitch White, we'll have to see him perform, right? Like that move makes a ton of sense, but we got to go evaluate him. We got to watch how he pitches and see how that plays out. But giving up, the only guy who hurts today is Frasso, because you can dream on that being like a top of the rotation starter. He's a hyper athletic guy. But yeah, I mean, C+ feels right. And there's going to be people who want to give it an F, and I get that, if holding it up to the Yankees deadline. But yeah, the Jays are better than they were yesterday. They're just worse than the Yankees were a couple days ago. That gap has been widened a little bit. So, that counts for something, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's ultimately a team you're in all likelihood going to have to go through, right? If you want to get to the World Series this year. So it's a fair thing to bring up. I also just think, I don't know, as lame as this sounds, you mentioned the people who would give them an F are going to sit there and be like, oh, hugging your prospects, blah, blah, blah. But like last year, they gave up significant prospects to go get Jose Barrios and then paid them. They paid Kevin Gausman this offseason. They went and gave up prospects to go get Matt Chapman. Like, it's not like this team has just been sitting idly on their hands while Bo and Vlad come up to the majors and this wave comes in. Like, it's not like Atkins has done nothing. It's the furthest thing from that. So as lame as it is in the moment to sit there and be like, they made a big splash in the offseason. They went and picked up Matt Chapman. They did get better, like you said. I think that is kind of the truth of what happened here. And yeah, you would have loved to see them go get one reliever with swing and miss stuff. And that's probably the biggest downfall. Like I was close to kind of saying like, I'll give him a B for this, but I think I would have liked to see one more impactful bullpen arm added for me to go to a B. So I'll agree with you and going with a C+. Like, yep, they got better. Yep, there's some upside in these moves, but there was nothing flashy. There's nothing that's significantly impactful in this haul they got at the deadline. You mentioned the Yankees, and I want to get to them in a second, but first going to give some love to our friends over at DoorDash. Promo code BJNPodDD gets first-time users of the app 25% off and no delivery fees. Coombsy's exhausted from moving. I guarantee you he is ordering from DoorDash tonight. Maybe he's ordering Montana's, because everyone loves a little rack of ribs after a busy day. Let's talk about what else happened around the American League East, and we'll start with the Yankees. What did you think about what they did? Because they were certainly active and they certainly got better. And I'm actually surprised when I saw the Jordan Montgomery for Harrison Bader trade come across. I was like, oh, it's done. They're getting Pablo Lopez too. And they're just going like full on juggernaut mode. But regardless of that Lopez deal not happening, they still got much, much better.
Yeah, it was a really interesting deadline for the Yankees. Going Harrison Bader is kind of that finishing move. They decided they just wanted to have an elite defensive center fielder. Bader can't hit all that well, but they gave up Jordan Montgomery, a rotation stalwart for the team. Guy who's been there a long time with another year and a half of control. So that was kind of a surprising trade. And yeah, it's great to see Pablo Lopez not be the reason for that. Sending Joey Gallo out just made sense. That's kind of what the team had progressed to. But yeah, I mean, the two big trades the Yankees made, the ones that really felt of note were on Monday. So getting Scott Effross, which is a funny name when you think of how some Jays fans feel about Blue Jays GM right now. But they got Effross, who's kind of a sidearm reliever who's been very good this year as a rookie and kind of one of those like 6-year controllable guys. The big move being Frankie Montas and Lou Trevino. Big trade. That was a big move, and one the Jays were very much in. The finalists with Oakland were the Blue Jays and the Yankees. And again, it's one of those deals where fans look at it and see it as a bit of an underwhelming prospect return. And basically, it all comes down to how you view Ken Waldichuk, who Fangraphs has as like I think 35th overall in their prospects list. They view him as like a premium left-handed starter. He's striking out like I think 14 per 9 in AAA this year. So he's got the stats to back up what he's doing. And then some other names along with that, Luis Medina, who's 60th in Fangraphs. So you look at Fangraphs, they're super high on this return. Like they're really liking it for the Yankees. You look at Keith Law, and he's much lower on it. So it's kind of prospects are in the eye of the beholder, and clearly the A's kind of more aligned with the Fangraphs view than the Athletic view of that. But yeah, I mean, they made more moves than the Blue Jays, and an already good Yankee team who's running away with the division is now better set up for playoff success, which is the big thing there.
Other teams that were busy, the Seattle Mariners obviously making their big splash a few days ago now, getting Luis Castillo. The Minnesota Twins, who are leading the Central, they had a busy day picking up a couple of arms, including Michael Fulmer, a guy who the Jays reportedly had some level of interest in. He obviously a bullpen arm. I'd imagine the Jays called on pretty much every bullpen arm that was available. But the Twins looked like they got a lot better. Seattle looked like they got better. But the most interesting thing for me when you look at this, it feels like every team that's not currently holding a playoff spot in the American League just wave the white flag. We're done. There's going to be no playoff race this year, because even though Cleveland's only a game back, like they're I don't view them as much of a threat considering how much better Seattle got, and the fact Tampa and Toronto probably aren't going to fall off that significantly. Baltimore, for me, like for a fan base that could use some good vibes, this just has to be a real punch in the you-know-what to like watch Trey Mancini go out the door, watch your closer go out the door as well, and be like, well, this whole fun first half was all for nothing because our front office doesn't believe.
Yeah, that's one of those spreadsheet moves, right? Where it's the Orioles were not making the playoffs. They never were. At the same time, when you are building a culture, you gotta weigh how valuable is this trade return we're going to get for, players at X, Y, and Z versus what we're trying to build here and sustain here and be known for. So it seems like the Trey Mancini return was fine. They've got some upside arms there, which are valuable to a team like Baltimore. So I totally get it. But that guy was the heart and soul of that locker room. And yeah, he was a free agent at the end of the year, but they could have kept him as well. And just an organization on the ascent. So you don't want to have all these players who are overachieving and just having a really impressive season now just kind of feel downtrodden and lousy going into the final 2 months and feel like it doesn't matter, right? So again, the Orioles could just go out and keep winning at the same pace and be fine. And trading the reliever probably makes more sense, just because less of a bullpen kick. But yeah, that was an interesting move to see. And obviously the Jays play them 15 more times. So they've got one reliever who's pitched very well against them, but they don't have to see now. And Mancini who's hit well against the Jays who won't be in play. So it helps them there. And the Red Sox had a weird deadline, like super weird. They decided to unload some pieces, keep some others, make some very strange ads, including Eric Hosmer, for free, basically. But I'm just like, the Red Sox top prospect is a first baseman in AAA. So I don't know why you're just not playing Tristan Casas. So there's some weird moves by the teams who aren't currently in the playoff picture. And the playoffs do kind of feel anything can happen. The Red Sox aren't so much worse that you feel like they can't just get hot and make a run, and they still have Eovaldi and JD Martinez. So
they didn't move Bogarts.
Yeah, they didn't move Bogarts. Like they just unloaded a couple pieces and then added a few things here and there. It was just a weird, kind of hard to make sense of deadline for the Red Sox, but they're not down and out of it. But it does kind of feel like the teams in the playoffs are the ones that kind of really care this year, and the teams just outside of it were like, it's not worth it. Except for Tampa. I mean, Tampa added David Peralta, that was about it. So, the Blue Jays had a better deadline than the Rays, but that's not a bar you want to grade yourself against, because the Rays typically aren't heavy buyers. They just do it all through their own depth. So, yeah, weird AL trade deadline for sure.
Let's wrap up with this courtesy of our friends at PointsBet Canada. They have updated World Series odds over on their site. Dodgers 1, Yankees 2, then it goes Astros, Mets, Braves, Padres at 10-1. And let's just pause there for a second, because the Jays are next to 15-1. The Padres at 10-1, considering the move they made today. And I can't believe it took me 33 minutes into this podcast to bring it up, considering it's one of the biggest trades, not just of this deadline or of the last 10 deadlines, but one of the biggest trades in Major League Baseball history. And that's Juan Soto going to the Padres for a monumental haul. Like, there are some big names, guys that could very well be perennial all-stars in their major league career, BK. But I still look at this and go, why would you trade Juan Soto? And I get why they're trading Juan Soto. They offered him $440 million. He said no. You cash in on that, I suppose. But he's a 23-year-old future Hall of Famer. And they moved him. Like, I just still can't believe we got that big of a move in season, even though there was a lot of talk leading up to it. But just give me both sides of this. First, the prospects prospects that the Nats are getting, and then also how this move bolsters a Padres team who also got Josh Bell in it. And again, like, they're 10-1 to win the World Series. I think it's a great spot because they look loaded.
Yeah, I mean, they got a pretty heavy return from the Padres. The Nationals did. Again, looking at prospect lists, that type of thing, they basically got 3 top 50 guys, and then Mackenzie Gore, who I believe has graduated, but he was one of the top pitching prospects for years. And then Susanna, who's kind of this lesser heralded, but another fireball arm. But here's the thing: if you're going to trade a super valuable player for a haul, to me, I want the return to be position players focused, right? Like the big 3 of this deal are Robert Hassel III, James Wood, and CJ Abrams. Again, Abrams up to like top 5 in some lists, Hassel top 15 in some lists, and James Wood, who is like a top 50 guy right now. But you talk to prospect guys about him and they'll be like, yeah, he's probably top 10 by the end of the year. So they got basically upside athletes too. Like these aren't college guys with this like high floor, and that's why they have prospect stature. These are athletes with premium production in the minors, like premium production, who come with a ton of athleticism, whose draft stock and draft position matches kind of what you're getting results now. It's a return that makes sense for the Nationals.
And for the Padres, they're going to be rolling with Tatis and Machado and Soto, and it's just an absolute juggernaut. You combine that with the fact that they managed to also go and grab Josh Hader this deadline too. I just look at that and I hold them, again, just using the PointsBet odds here for reference. I hold the Padres up to the Braves and the Mets, maybe not quite even at the Dodgers level yet, but I think they've leapfrogged the Braves and the Mets, and I think they're the second best team in the National League. And I think in a best of 7 series, considering the assets that they have, BK, I hope you were doing okay. I know usually it's proper podcasting etiquette to ignore that, but you had a Juan Soto trade sized coughing fit there, and I'm worried about you, man. You're good.
I got non-COVID sick 3.5 weeks ago, and I still have the lingering cough. And I lasted. I was doing so good. I didn't even have water during this podcast. I was cruising. It wasn't even a thought. And then it hit me. And I was incapable of talking again until I got some water. We'll see how I finish. Hopefully finish strong. I think we're almost done here anyways. But yes, apologies for that.
I'll hit you with a quick one then. Are the Padres the second best team in the National League, or do you have them lower than that?
I haven't thought too much about that. It's a very good question. They probably, from a playoff odds perspective, I wouldn't position them there because they have to play in that wild card round. Whereas the Mets or the Braves, whoever wins the NL East, will get a bye through that round. So from a probability standpoint, I wouldn't have them second. From a roster standpoint, assuming Tatis comes back healthy, I think I'd be comfortable at least putting them in that conversation.
Yeah,
that's the tier of teams, right? It's the Dodgers are cream of the crop. And then you have very good Braves, Mets, and Padres teams. So that kind of seems like the core 4 in the National League, and any of those teams can make a World Series run. And 2 of them are going to be playing in the wild card round, which would be fascinating, right? Potentially against each other, which would be just one heck of a series. Whether you got like Braves, Padres, or Mets, Padres in a 3-game series to kick off the postseason, like sign me up for that. But yeah, it's a very good team. Soto's so fun, and I'm going to San Diego in a few weeks, so I'm hoping like that whole Tatis is back and I get to see that whole lineup. But yeah, really fun roster.
Before we wrap up, are you making any more trips out to Toronto this year? Are you going to see the Dome one more time before it gets $300 million in renovations pumped into it?
No, my next trip should be with the new look outfield and nice. The 800 lounges, or specialty seating areas, or hangout areas with all these decks that they're putting in and stuff like that. I'm excited about the renovations. I think they look really cool. Very excited for my next trip out there because of that. But yeah, I don't expect to be out to Toronto again. Maybe I'd make a push for a playoff series, but otherwise, my next time there should be with a renovated outfield.
All right. Well, appreciate you hopping in for some trade deadline insight here. It was a pleasure doing the pod with you.
Thank you, sir.
All right. That's going to do it for episode 100 of Blue Jays Nation Radio. Shout out to DoorDash and shout out to our new friends at Montana's. From now until September 12th, it is their all-you-can-eat rib fest. You can find out more using the hashtag #GetMontana's. Have a good week. No podcast coming after the Rays series here, which means the next time we chat with you, it'll be after the Twins series. on Sunday. Hope you all enjoy deadline day and enjoy the next couple series of Blue Jays baseball, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to Blue Jays Nation Radio, a member of the Nation Network of podcasts and delivered by DoorDash. Don't forget to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from to never miss an episode.